Our next talk will be given by Dr. Klockow McClain, and she is a research scientist and societal applications coordinator for SIMS, and she serves as the group lead for the newly formed Societal Impacts Group. Before joining SIMS, she worked for several years as a policy advisor for social scientific research at the NOAA Office of Weather and Air Quality outside Washington, D.C., where she served as the first social scientist in that office. She was the 2013-14 AMS UCAR Congressional Science Fellow, and she also completed her PhD in Human Hazards Geography from the University of Oklahoma. She also holds an MS in Professional Meteorology from OU and a BS in Economics and Synoptic Meteorology from Purdue University.
Thank you, Greg. All right, well now for something a little bit different, although seeds of this have been woven through many different presentations. So I'm really excited to talk about the societal impacts portfolio of SIMS today. And much like others have said, especially Adam, I haven't been here to witness the last 40 years of SIMS development, but I have you beat a little bit. I am the youngest of the presenters. I was actually negative 4 or 5 years old when SIMS was created. So I sat down with Randy Pepler and asked him, okay, what have I not been there for? Give me some insights. But fortunately, it turns out this is a really recent portfolio, and I've been there for a lot of the kinds of big turns and development of the societal impacts portfolio of SIMS. Kind of like Forrest Gump, you know how he was there just incidentally in really interesting places throughout history. I feel like as I was putting this presentation together, that's kind of how I was through some of the development of SIMS. So in the beginning, the first vestige of the societal impacts portfolio I could find was in 1993, the end-of-year report. And at the time, the theme was called Socioeconomic Impacts of Mesoscale Weather Systems. That first part makes sense for SIMS. And regional scale climate variations, which you might look at and say, that makes a little less sense for a place like SIMS. So I'll draw your attention to the socioeconomic part and the regional scale climate variations part, and describe how both of them came to be. Really, the reason that this existed was Pete Lamb. And he made this whole theme really come to life. He came here in 1991, so it didn't take him very long to establish this as one of the SIMS research themes. And much like Greg, he came from the University of Illinois, but with a slightly different group. He was with the Illinois Water Survey. And the Illinois Water Survey, a place that actually brought a lot of people here, they had done some really important work valuing climate observations and climate forecasts for agriculture. So some of the preeminent work that's been done in that area came out of folks who worked in the Illinois Water Survey. And so Pete himself, he did research examining teleconnections between global scale forces and the kinds of weather patterns that favor or don't favor agricultural production. So when he came here, he carried that research with him and continued to work in that arena. And I'll also through this talk suggest I'm kind of giving like a history of social science talk a little bit. And SIMS, the changes that have gone on through SIMS have actually been reflected in the changes going on in our field as a whole as we've worked to embrace the social sciences and figure out even what social sciences we need. So it all started with economics. And so Pete was working with folks who were doing economics work, and NOAA as a whole was really involving itself with economics. It actually had been involved with economics from the beginning, from the 1970s when it was formed as an agency when we brought fisheries under the hood with weather, because fisheries, they have treaty obligations that they have authority over, and so economic milestones are a part of that. Economists have always worked on the fisheries side. They have a very robust economic capability. We also needed economists. Anytime that you guys wanted to get those toys, you know, that you were all talking about, the different radars and observation systems, you would go to Congress and present an economic benefits case. So economists were really useful for that too. Within about 10 years of Pete arriving, SIMS had involved itself with some local economists to do a different kind of work. On the left is Dan Sutter. He was an economist here at the University of Oklahoma for a number of years. He came from hazards insurance, was sort of his area, the way that he got hooked in. And then in the middle is Kevin Simmons. He was at UCO at the time, and he came to us studying hazards mitigation policy on the benefits of mitigating. So those two teamed up, and they wrote eventually a book that many of you are familiar with, The Economic and Societal Benefits of Tornadoes. They conducted a big econometric analysis trying to figure out what are some of the factors that belie fatalities in situations where there are tornadoes. And on the far right side, we have Jeff Lazo. He wasn't here, but his work has been very influential in our field as well. He's valued the economic impact of weather forecasts on the U.S. economy, and was very influential in helping us to get some of the things that we've gotten as a field. So, interestingly enough, I'll start with the economists. By the mid-2000s was sort of this feeling that economics was getting us some of the questions that we wanted answered, but it wasn't doing a lot of what we wanted to see. We were really interested in questions like, why is it that people are dying, and what can we do about it? Those big models that the economists were giving us helped us to define some of the factors that people exhibited that led to or predicted that they might be more likely to die in a tornado, but it didn't help us to go further than that. And for that, we needed more social scientific input than that economists alone could provide. Jeff Lazo was at NCAR at the time, and he recognized this and was also very interested in these broader questions. And so he teamed up with folks like Rebecca Morse and Julie Demuth, who many of you know. At the time, they were just trained as physical scientists. They later then got trained in various aspects of social sciences, but they teamed up to create what became WAS-IS, that was funded through NOAA, a 5-year investment at NCAR. And this was a turning point for the careers of many people. Many people in this room actually went through WAS-IS. Raise your hand if you went through WAS-IS or attended a WAS-IS meeting at any point. A lot of people. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why I don't have pictures actually of all the people in the room who do societal impacts work, because it is a large fraction of the people here who were influenced, beginning with especially this particular program. So eventually we decided that we wanted to bring what they had at NCAR, what they were developing there, we wanted to develop that closer to home and have a really well-honed research capability in the social sciences. So in 2008, a 3-year program was launched involving Eve Gruntfest, who was one of the original progenitors of WAS-IS, and she brought on postdoc Heather Lazarus. These two folks, they come from a field of, I would qualify it as sort of the natural hazards and disaster sciences community. That's a community of social scientists who study how people manage to live, adapt, survive in this very volatile world. And Eve comes from hazards geography in particular. She was a student of Gilbert White, who he was this really famous geographer who helped to describe how when we try to control floods and prevent flood threat from impinging upon us, we actually increase our overall risk by building things like dams and levees and so on. And if you look around the country at the natural hazard centers and disaster centers, many of them are populated by students of Gilbert White. He was a very influential man. Eve herself studied how people respond to floods and the kind of counterintuitive ideas people have about how they should proceed to survive them that actually end up getting them killed. And then Heather Lazarus came to us from the field of anthropology, studying climate change adaptation. So through the 3 years of social science woven into meteorology, or SWIM, 2 master's students graduated. Both went through the geography program. And they had 3 PhD students. I had been one of them. Gina Esco was another, many of you are familiar with, in communication, and Monica Zappa. And all 3 of us, for various reasons, ended up leaving the program, so we didn't graduate from SWIM per se. I think the coolest of the 3 of us is actually Monica Zappa. It might not be a name many of you are familiar with, but she one day got on her bike, biked up to Alaska, joined a fishing village and raises Iditarod dogs, and actually now every year she runs the Iditarod. So as much as she left the field, she went on to do something really stinking cool, and we're still really proud of her for it. Love seeing her pictures every year. So by the end of that 3 years, Eve retired. SWIM as an organization sort of sank, but social sciences yet persisted. in large part because of some of the other social scientists who were on campus who did related work, but were part of a different community. This is actually folks who are part of the risk community. So these are people who study a broader class of risks, not just natural hazards, but any of the risks that people can find themselves facing. And on the left, Dan O'Hare, he was the chair of the communication program at the time. And he came to the university studying, he had big NIH grants, and he studied smoking campaigns and why it is that people, though they know that smoking will kill them, why do they persist in smoking? Especially experts, actually. Why is it that they in particular continue to do this? On the right, the right three are all political science faculty here at the university. Carol and Hank came to us they having done a lot of work for the Department of Energy, and they have studied nuclear energy and how we make choices about disposing of the nuclear waste that results from nuclear energy. So all of these folks came from different kinds of risks into weather and climate. Dan O'Hare was really interested in weather risk issues, and he led a number of efforts that brought people from across campus to do systematic reviews of literature that could apply to weather. And Carol, Hank, and Joe were really interested, initially they were really interested in climate change and climate policy and how it is that people make decisions for dealing with climate change or failing to do so. And I had the opportunity to do research with all of these folks in my PhD years. Also at the same time, there was another undercurrent of social scientists or behavioral scientists coming through the Weather Center. We had folks from an applied branch of psychology, human factors researchers. Chen Ling was actually here at the university. Robert Hoffman was not, but he had done a lot of work with the FAA in studying pilot behavior and how they used weather instruments. So human factors researchers are people who explore the human-machine mix and how we make tools that humans can actually use to do the things they need to do. These folks helped to inform a thread of research that several people have mentioned, that of the human forecaster. So we're creating all these technologies. Can people use them? How do people use them? How does the forecaster use them? How can we make them so that they are more usable by the forecaster? All of that was going on at the same time. So you can imagine that among all of this milieu, there were so many different theoretical frameworks coming in. It's kind of like, putting it in a physical science frame, it's kind of like having chemists and biologists and physicists all come together wanting to study, maybe molecular behavior or something. And they all come at sort of the same item, but with very different ideas about how it functions, and very different languages, and very different kinds of methodologies for exploring that. And while we all involve ourselves with people, I can't tell you in these years how volatile it was to try to have conversations about, okay, so what is the research that needs to be done in the weather community to try to save lives? What of all these questions everybody is studying are the most important, and how is it that we can all come together and get this research conducted? These were really exciting, interesting, but also very challenging years. One of the neat things I want to highlight that grew out of this, though, actually, there are folks who were here sort of in this building who decided to change their career trajectories mid-career and pursue more of the social behavioral scientific work, and then go on to influence one of our native departments, the geography department, and create sort of a hazards geography capability where one didn't really exist before. Randy Pepler, our own Randy Pepler, he ended up getting his PhD in geography, in very human, very almost quasi-anthropological geography. And Renee McPherson had been my advisor, my master's and PhD advisor, and I kind of feel like we had a Gilmore Girls thing going where you lead, I will follow. I joined the geography department for my PhD, and eventually Renee joined it as faculty some years later. And Mark Schaefer got his PhD in political science, was studying adaptation policy, climate change adaptation policy kinds of questions, and also has joined the geography department. So where's SIMS going now? We evolved after all of this, in the German you say the Sturm und Drang, all of the drama of trying to bring all of these groups together and move on from economics and grow our social scientific portfolio and think about what we needed to be. The theme changed. The theme no longer was socioeconomic and including climate issues. It became societal, a broader term that they meant to encompass all of these other sciences, and socioeconomic impacts of high-impact weather systems. And it's no coincidence that that happened in 2012, because in 2012, also within NOAA, there was a keen focus growing on social sciences for a weather-ready nation. After the 2011 tornadoes, there were a series of workshops held to try to figure out, well, what went wrong? Why did those people die? The first questions and assumptions were all about physical science, and coming out of those meetings, it actually was revealed that probably the issues are social scientific, and we need communication scholars, we need behavioral scientists of a bunch of different forms to really inform how this works. So sometime after the Weather-Ready Nation became a major NOAA priority, it became reflected in the SIMS research theme, and NOAA headquarters started to put out more literature on this. So this is actually a report that's available to anyone who wants to see more of the work that's relevant in this area. It was put out just a couple of years ago. I got to be one of the report authors because, again, incidentally, I just happened to be at headquarters when they were really trying to put this together. So this is a really neat generic overview of a lot of major theories and ideas that encompass the work that we're doing here. And here at the university, one program really stands out as having brought together all of these social scientific perspectives, as well as some of the physical science development work that's going on into an end-to-end cohesive package, and that's Facets, that sort of Lance's vision, bringing us all together. So I'll conclude by just saying our research portfolio today has become very holistic. It's system-oriented. We examine all of these questions. We look at the human forecaster, how it is that they take in technologies and then communicate information downstream, how that information is used by our partners, and then how the U.S. population responds to it as an end-to-end system. And with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Questions? I guess you did a pretty good job. You've talked mainly a lot about, what about climate? Do you want to say anything about societal aspects of climate?
It's an interesting question. Since Pete left, we kind of grew away from that a bit. But I mentioned Heather Lazarus, the swim postdoc. She left. She went to Boulder, but she still does work with the South Central Climate Science Center. And I think that this work continues, but maybe just not in this institute, but in our other related institutes. As I look at Renee, to nod or no, I think that that's where a lot of that social scientific work has gone. It's not that it left the university, but it just was housed in a different institution.
Okay, well, thank you very much.